All right, ready to dive in. We're tackling a classic Star Trek, the Next Generation episode today, The Naked Now. You sent us some excerpts from the transcript, so we're going to explore what exactly went down on the Enterprise and how it all connects to the bigger Star Trek universe.
It really grabs you right from the start with that mystery you know. The Enterprise is on its way to meet up with the Tsiolkovsky, a science vessel, right? They're checking out a collapsing star. But then they get these weird messages. Almost funny, but something's clearly wrong.
It's like a distress call, but someone's doing stand-up comedy at the same time.
Yeah, and then the Enterprise finds the whole Tsiolkovsky crew dead. And get this, some of them weren't exactly dressed for the occasion. Kind of creepy, kind of absurd all at once.
So how do they start figuring out what happened?
At first, the Enterprise crew thinks maybe it's mass hysteria or some kind of shared delusion. But then they find these old records from Captain Kirk's time on the original Enterprise, and it turns out something similar happened back then. They start thinking it might be this weird water-carbon complex.
This water-carbon complex, how does it affect the crew? I mean, you said it acts like alcohol, but what does that actually do to them?
Well, think about what alcohol does. It lowers your inhibitions, right? Makes people do things they normally wouldn't, maybe say things they'll regret later. This complex is kind of like that, but even stronger. It messes with their judgment, throws off their logic, basically makes them act on whatever they're secretly feeling.
So that makes you think, right? If something could really just erase all our inhibitions, what would that mean? I mean, would we even be responsible for our actions? Pretty heavy stuff. But let's get back to the Enterprise for a sec. We know this thing starts spreading, so who's the first one to show symptoms?
One of the first is Geordi LaForge. You know, he's always wanted to see without the visor, experience what it's like to have normal vision. Well, with this complex in his system, he decides to ask Dr. Crusher for a pretty unusual procedure. He's not just looking for medical help. He actually wants to see the world differently.
And I'm guessing Dr. Crusher can't just magically fix his vision.
No, but she does try to help him understand what he's feeling. But this whole thing leads to a really awkward encounter between Geordi and Tasha Yar. She's feeling the effects of the contaminant too, and it's like she transforms instantly. Suddenly she's worried about her appearance, flirting with Data. Remember that outfit she wears? Not exactly standard Starfleet uniform.
Oh yeah, that's a classic. So it's like this contaminant strips away their professionalism and brings out all these hidden feelings. And didn't Worf have something weird happen with a limerick?
Yes. Right in the middle of this crisis, Worf reports this strange incident about a limerick. It's just so out there, really shows how bizarre things are getting.
It's a good example of how the episode can be super serious one minute and then totally funny the next. But amidst all the chaos, there's this bigger problem they have to deal with, right? The collapsing star.
Oh yeah, time is running out, and the star is collapsing faster and faster. And to make things even worse, Wesley Crusher accidentally takes control of the whole ship. He's trying to help, but his judgment's totally impaired by the contaminant.
You've got this young, inexperienced ensign basically in command of the Federation flagship. Sounds like a nightmare for Picard.
You said it. And then there's Data. He's affected by the complex too. He's trying to understand what's going on with everyone, trying to act human. He keeps saying he's fully functional. It's funny, but also kind of sad, Like he wants to connect with the crew, but he just doesn't get it.
He's always trying to figure out what it means to be human. This episode shows how much he wants to fit in.
Yeah, he's struggling with all that, while Dr. Crusher is frantically trying to find a cure. The old formula from Kirk's time, it doesn't work, and the situation is getting pretty desperate.
So we've got a crew losing control, a ship in danger, and a collapsing star that's basically a ticking time bomb. What happens next?
Riker's down in engineering, trying to fight off the contaminant and regain control of the ship. It's a real test of his leadership, And then out of nowhere, Wesley has this flash of insight.
Wait, Wesley, the guy who's basically drunk on space alcohol?
Yeah, he suggests reversing the polarity of the tractor beam. Now, a tractor beam normally pulls stuff towards the ship. But Wesley realizes if they reverse it, they could actually push the ship away from all the debris the collapsing star is throwing out.
Pretty genius, considering his state. But can they actually do it? I mean, reversing a tractor beam like that can't be easy.
It's a long shot, but Data sees the potential. He's got the super fast processing ability, so he jumps right on it and starts trying to reconfigure the engines.
So now it's a race against time, right? The star's going to blow, and Data's trying to make this crazy plan work. Must be pretty intense for everyone on board.
No doubt. We see them all working together, even though they're under the influence, trying to avoid complete disaster. And you know what? They actually managed to pull it off.
That's a relief. They escape the debris field, but something tells me things aren't back to normal just yet.
You're right about that. The crew starts to come back to their senses,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of awkwardness, especially from Tasha. She's not really dealing with what happened. And Picard, even though he's glad they survived, he's thinking about what this whole thing revealed about his crew. It's a pretty deep moment, adds a lot to the episode.
So we've got a collapsing star, a crew acting out of character, a mind-altering substance, and a thrilling escape. Seems like The Naked Now really covers a lot of ground. But what does it all mean? What's the takeaway here?
We've only just scratched the surface, but you're starting to see how this episode digs into human nature. It's about what happens when we lose control, and how sometimes the most unexpected ideas can save the day. It also shows the importance of teamwork, even when things get crazy. But there's so much more to unpack, especially when we think about how it fits into the whole Star Trek universe.
And that's where we'll pick it up next time. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started with The Naked Now.
Welcome back. When we were talking about that water carving complex, it really got me thinking about how it's kind of like what we worry about with technology today.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean.
Like the way it takes over their brains and makes them do stuff without thinking. It's kind of like how people worry about being manipulated online, like with all those algorithms and targeted ads.
Definitely. It's like the episode is showing us our own fears about being controlled by things we don't understand. And it does it in a way that's both funny and kind of creepy.
Exactly. It's that classic Star Trek blend of entertainment and social commentary. But let's talk about how The Naked Now connects back to other Star Treks. You mentioned it draws inspiration from the original series, so what are those connections?
Well, the big one is that it's basically a reimagining of an original series episode called The Naked Time. In that one, the Enterprise crew gets infected with a similar contaminant, and it leads to, well, let's just say things get interesting. So it's like a tribute to the classic series with a next generation twist.
Yeah, and it's not just the plot. There are scenes and moments in The Naked Now that directly mirror The Naked Time. Like, both episodes have a scene where someone takes over the ship's controls while under the influence.
Nice. It's like they're tying the two series together. But if it's a reimagining, what are some of the differences?
Oh, there are definitely differences. For one, in The Naked Now, the contaminant is directly tied to the collapsing star. So there's this added danger that wasn't in the original episode.
Right. They're not just dealing with a wacky crew. They're trying to survive a collapsing star.
Exactly. The stakes are much higher. And that's where those next generation elements really come in. You see all this advanced technology, the sensors, the tractor beam. That ends up being super important for their escape.
Speaking of tech, what about Data? He's affected by the contaminant too, but it's different than how it affects the humans. What's going on there?
That's one of the most interesting parts of the episode because it really highlights how Data's different. While the humans get all emotional and uninhibited, Data gets super rational. Like the contaminant strips away any pretense of being human and just leaves his pure logic.
So all that effort he usually puts into understanding humans, it just disappears.
Yeah, and remember how he keeps saying he's fully functional?
Yeah.
He's supposed to be funny, but it also shows how he doesn't really understand what's happening around him.
It's like the episode uses humor to explore these big questions about consciousness and what makes us human.
Absolutely. And even though he's different, Data ends up being the one who saves the ship. He can think clearly and act quickly even under the influence, and that's what allows them to escape.
It shows that even though he's an android, he's a crucial part of the crew.
Totally agree. And what's interesting is how Data's actions in this episode foreshadow his development later in the series. That desire to be human, it becomes a big part of his story.
It's like this episode lays the groundwork for his journey of self-discovery.
Exactly. And it's one of the things that makes The Naked Now so great. It's entertaining, but it also sets up these larger themes that play out over the whole series. Before we move on, though, I think it's worth talking about the overall message of the episode about human nature.
Yeah. What do you think The Naked Now is trying to say about who we are?
It's definitely exploring the idea of inhibitions and how they shape our behavior. When those inhibitions are removed, it shows what's really underneath. It makes you wonder if we're all just one bad day away from losing control.
And the episode seems to be saying that while those inhibitions can hold us back, they're also important.
For sure. They keep us from making bad decisions, from hurting ourselves or others. They're kind of what allows society to function.
So is The Naked Now a warning then? Like, be careful or you'll end up like the crew.
Maybe. But it's more complex than that. There are also moments of real connection and compassion, even in the middle of the chaos. Remember how Geordi talks about wanting to see normally? Or how Wesley, even though he's basically drunk, comes up with the idea that saves them.
Yeah, good point. So maybe it's not just a warning, but also a celebration of how complex we are as humans.
I think that's a great way to put it. It's about the whole spectrum of human experience, the good and the bad.
I like that it's that balance between caution and optimism that makes The Naked Now so interesting.
Couldn't agree more. It's that blend of darkness and light that makes it such a powerful Star Trek story.
Okay, so before we boldly go into the final part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways about The Naked Now that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
The main thing is to remember how layered this episode is. It's a reimagining, it's commentary on human nature, it even touches on our anxieties about technology. It's a story that makes you laugh, think, and maybe even question what you believe about yourself.
Well said. Now get ready, because in the final part of our deep dive, we'll be uncovering even more about The Naked Now. Don't go anywhere. And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into The Naked Now. We've covered a lot of ground, the plot, the themes, the connections to other Star Trek. Now, what about some of the things that make this episode so memorable, from a storytelling point of view?
Well, one thing that really sticks with me is how they use visuals to tell the story. Like that image of the collapsing star, it's not just there for the plot, it's like a metaphor, for everything that's falling apart.
Yeah, it's like it represents what's happening to the crew as they lose control.
Exactly. It's like their whole world is collapsing along with the star.
Yeah.
And then you see how their appearance changes, too. Uniforms get wrinkled, hair's a mess. It's like this visual way of showing how things are unraveling.
It's those little details that add so much. What about the ending, though? The Enterprise escapes, but it doesn't feel completely happy, does it?
Yeah, there's this lingering feeling that something's not quite right. Like with Tasha, she just pretends nothing happened with Data.
Yeah.
There's got to be some emotional fallout from all of this.
Yeah, and even Picard, you can tell he's been through something. He's still optimistic, but he's seen his crew at their most vulnerable.
Right, and it makes you wonder what happens next. How does this affect their relationships? Do they ever really recover from losing control like that?
It's those unanswered questions that make this episode stick with you. It's not just a one-off adventure. It makes you think about bigger things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about human nature, about control, about the effects of trauma. It goes deeper than a lot of other Star Trek episodes.
So you're saying it's more than just a disease of the week story?
Definitely. It's about what it means to be human, even with all the messy stuff that comes with it.
Well put. So as we wrap up our deep dive, what are some final thoughts for our listener? What should they take away from The Naked Now?
I think it's worth watching this episode again, paying attention to all the little details, the visuals, the characters, all the things that make it so rich. The Naked Now is a flawed episode, but it's also a really interesting look at what makes us human, at our best and our worst.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And with that, we're signing off from this deep dive into The Naked Now. We hope you enjoyed this journey with us, learned something new, and maybe even got inspired to think about these themes in your own life. After all, who hasn't had a moment where they wanted to just let loose, forget about all the rules? But as we saw in The Naked Now, there's a balance to strike. We need those inhibitions, those boundaries to keep things from falling apart. Thanks for listening, and until next time, live long and prosper.